Let's get started on Chapter 17, Configuring Security Policies. In this chapter, we will discuss auditing, enabling auditing, and specifying what files and objects will be audited. We will look at Event Viewer, rights, built-in groups, and configuring security options. We will look at restricted groups, security templates, optimizing group policy, GP update, managing local users and groups, and configuring UAC, User Account Control. Group policy, as you know, is a group of configuration settings. And a group policy object is a file which sits on the domain controller and which applies to all users and computers in the domain. Group policy settings fall into three general categories. Desktop settings, so we can give everybody in the company the same desktop, the same screen background. Remote installation of software, whereby we use group policy to push applications down to workstations, and group policy can be used for security, and part of security is auditing. So let's look at auditing. Auditing is whereby we look at the event log, and the event log is a file which records who logged on, when they logged off, who looked at which file, especially confidential files such as the payroll database file, and what the administrator did, such as changed somebody's passwords or deleted a user. In configuring security policies, we will configure the auditing portion of security policies. When we configure file auditing, there are two steps in configuring file auditing. First, we enable auditing in group policy, and then we go and we specify which files will be audited. We go to Server Manager, we go to Tools, and we select Group Policy Management. Under the Group Policy Management console, I will go to the default domain policy, right-click, and select Edit. Under Computer Configuration, under Policies, under Windows Settings, under Security Settings, I will select the Audit Policy. And if we look at the Audit Policy, we can see that the Audit Policy is currently not configured. Let's look at Auditing Login Account Events. If we right-click on Auditing Account Login Events and select Properties, we can see it's not currently enabled. If I click on Enable, what we can do is we can audit when somebody logs in and when somebody logs off. If we select Failure, then we will also audit when somebody tries to log in but can't log in. And that might alert us to a bad guy who is trying to break in but just hasn't got in yet. So that's login auditing. And then auditing account management. When we audit account management, we're auditing what's happening to Active Directory, an administrator creating a user or deleting a user or changing somebody's password. And we can audit for success, and we can also audit for failure. Click on OK. And then when we talk about auditing object access, an object is a thing, but usually what they mean is file access. If I right-click on Audit Object Access and select Properties, it's not enabled. If I enable it and I select Success, then that will audit when somebody looks at a file, a confidential file, such as the payroll database file. If I click on Failure, it will audit if somebody tries to audit the database, the payroll database file, but they can't. And if I see there have been a large number of failures to access that confidential file, could be that somebody is is trying to break into that confidential file. Or it could be that an accountant is just trying to access the payroll database file, but he can't because he doesn't have the permissions because we forgot to add him to the accountants group, which gives him permissions to that file. So this is auditing object access, file access. So that just enables it. Now let's specify what files will be audited, who will be audited, and what actions will be audited. If I go to the Windows Explorer, I could audit the entire contents of the C drive of the server, but there's no sense in auditing things that you don't need to audit. It just makes the audit log excessively large. The only thing that's really important to audit here is the accounting folder. So I will right-click on the accounting folder and select Properties. Under Security tab, I select Advanced, and I select the Auditing tab, and as you can see, nothing is being audited. So I will click on Add and specify who will be audited. I click on Advanced, followed by Find Now, and I could audit just one single person, or I could audit a group of people, but since you don't know who the bad guys are going to be, we would typically audit everyone, followed by OK and OK. And now the next question is, what actions do we want to have audited? Do we want to audit when somebody simply looks at a file but doesn't necessarily edit it? Yes. And we would probably also want to audit when somebody writes to a file, when somebody updates a file. So we will audit all actions. So what we're doing here is auditing the accounting folder and auditing everybody for all actions. And then to look at the audit log, go to Server Manager. Under Tools, we select Computer Management. Under Computer Management, there you can see there's the Event Viewer. I will expand System Tools. And under the Event Viewer, let's look at Windows logs, and we're interested in the security log. System log is like drivers loading or not loading. That's not the subject here. The subject is security log. And we can see it shows that such and such a user logged on, and this audit entry shows that a user tried to access an object, access a file. It shows what file it was, the time and the date of the file, and who accessed it. So when we audit events, we can audit when people log on, when they log off, when people access files. We can audit account management. And of course, we can also audit system events, such as drivers being loaded or services starting or services not starting. And of course, we can also audit group policy object changes. Let's now look at auditing Active Directory. Now, previously we looked at file auditing. Who looked at which file? Active Directory is auditing who is creating and deleting users, or who is modifying users or adding users to groups. So let's specify which objects will be audited. We could audit the entire domain, or we might just want to audit one particular organizational unit. If I go to Active Directory Users and Computers and I expand ccbcmd.edu and I select Organizational Unit 1 and I select Properties, and then I select Advanced, I can select the Auditing tab. Now this looks a lot like the screen we just looked at a minute ago, but now we're not auditing the creating and deleting and modification of files. We are auditing the creating and deleting and modification of Active Directory objects within the domain. I will click on Add to specify who we're going to audit. I select Principal. Principal is a person or a group. I select Principal, select Advanced, click on Find Now. I will audit everyone, followed by OK and OK. And then what actions do I want to audit? I want to audit all actions. In other words, you can audit when somebody makes a modification, or you can audit when somebody simply looks and I will click on OK and OK and OK. So what we have done is we have enabled the auditing of Active Directory objects. Now let's discuss assigning rights. Rights versus permissions. It's easy to mix them up. We have permissions to files, like you can read a file, or you can write to a file, or you can delete a file. Those are permissions. But a right is an action that a user can perform, such as shut the system down or change system time. And rights can be assigned to individual users, or rights can be assigned to groups. Permissions are what you can do to files. Rights are actions that you can take, such as shut the server down. If we go to the Group Policy Management console and I select the default domain controllers policy, I right-click and I select Edit. If I go under Computer Configuration, under Security Settings, under Local Policies, under User Rights Assignment, the log on locally right only applies to administrators and backup operators. What they mean here is log in on locally to the domain controller. This is the default domain controller group policy object. So this just applies to the domain controllers, not to the workstations. So what this means is that your average user cannot log in to the domain controller while standing at the domain controller. Users can log into the domain controller from the workstation, but we don't want users going up to the domain controller and then logging on. So typically, that right to log on to the domain controller locally only applies to administrators, backup operators, and server operators, and I could add an individual user if I wanted to. And then backing up, now a user can always back up his or her own individual personal files, but to back up the entire server, to run the backup software to back up the entire server, can only be done by administrators and members of the backup operators group. Average user can't do it. If I want somebody to do it, I could add them. I could add that user and I could give them that right. Or I could just add them to the backup operators group. Change system time. The average user can't change the system time. I mean, just imagine a bank. And if you could change the time on a bank's computer, you could put $1 in a savings account and then change the bank computer time to say 1,000 years in the future, and then go to your ATM machine, and then the interest would have gone to thousands and thousands of dollars, and then you could take the money out and then go back and reset the time on the server. Well, maybe that's an extreme example, but time, you don't want average user messing with the system time. If you do want somebody to change the system time, you could give that person the right to change the system time, or you could add them to the administrators group. Deny access to this computer from the network. That is not currently defined. Most people, we do want them to access this computer because this is the default domain controller policy. So we definitely do want people to access. But if there's a particular group that we don't want to access, we could add that group here. And then load and unload device drivers. Your average Joe cannot load and unload device drivers. And this doesn't apply to USB drives because they auto-load. But to manually load device drivers, which is something we don't average users to do, administrators can do it, print operators can do it, and server operators can do it. If I did want a user to do it here, I could give the user that right. Manage the auditing and security log. This is something only administrators can do. But if I want one particular user to be able to manage the auditing and security log, I would add that user right here. And to shut down the system, typically only administrators, backup operators, and server operators can shut down the system. If I wanted to give somebody the ability to shut down the system, I could add them to the administrators group, but maybe I don't want to give them all that power. So what I can do is right-click here and select Properties. And you can see administrators and backup operators, server operators do have the power to shut this system down. But to add regular user, I click on Add User, click on Browse, select Advanced, and I'll select the user Albert. OK, and OK. And now you can see I have added the user Albert. I have given him the right to shut the system down. So rights versus permissions. Permissions would be like read or write, something you could do to a file. But a right is an action that a user can perform, such as change the system time, perform backups, or load or unload drivers. And you can assign rights to an individual user. Or you can add a user to a built-in group which already has predefined rights. In other words, if you want somebody to back the system up, you could give them the right to back the system up, or you could just add them to the backup operators group. If you want to give the person the ability to shut down the system and restart the system and change permissions, you could give them those individual rights, or you could just add them to the server operators group. And of course, if you add somebody to the administrators group, then they have the rights of all of those other groups put together. Now let's look at security options. Securing replication traffic between domain controllers. Active Directory replication means that Active Directory is replicated. And what's replicated there is, among other things, usernames and passwords. And that's highly confidential information which is replicated between those two domain controllers. A bad guy with a protocol analyzer could use that protocol analyzer to intercept the replication traffic and potentially steal users' names, passwords. So what we can do to secure the replication traffic is to implement the latest version of NTLM. NTLM stands for NT LAN Manager. NT stands for New Technology. And this is a protocol that has been used for a long time by Microsoft for authentication, meaning traffic from the workstations to the servers when users log in. And it's also a protocol used for replication traffic between domain controllers. To secure the traffic, to encrypt it, to protect us from bad guys with protocol analyzers, we select the latest version of the NTLM protocol called NTLM version 2. And the only drawback is it's not compatible with older operating systems such as Windows 95 or Windows 98, but we certainly don't have any systems like that here at the Community College of Baltimore County, and it's pretty important to secure communications between domain controllers. So let's look at securing replication traffic either from workstations to domain controllers or between domain controllers. So what we do is we go to the default domain controllers group policy object, and we're under security settings, under local policies, under security options. One security option, which is already enabled, is to secure traffic from domain members. So that's any computer which is a member of the domain. Specifically, we're talking about workstations. And it will digitally encrypt traffic between the workstation and the domain controller. Another parameter we can select is domain controller LDAP. LDAP stands for Lightweight Data Access Protocol. It's just a fancy way of saying Active Directory. What this does is it requires the signing, that is to say the authentication of LDAP traffic, Active Directory traffic. That one's already configured. If we go down to select Interactive Logon Smart Card, that is not enabled. Now, if we wanted to have a really secure login, we can implement what they call multi-factor authentication, where in order to log in, the user needs not only a username and a password, but also a smart card. If we enable that, it will make for much more secure communications. But if the workstation does not have a smart card reader, then the user cannot log on. So I will not enable that one. And then if we select NTLM LAN Manager authentication level. And if I right-click on that guy and select Properties, and I look at Explain, we will see that this choice affects the level of authentication protocol used by clients. And if we look at the bottom, if we select the option that says NTLM version 2, which is the latest version of Land Manager of this protocol, to response only, then the clients will have to use that protocol. And the drawback is it does not support older clients, but we don't have older clients, not really old clients here. So therefore, we will select that option. So I select the drop down and I select the option that says NTLM version 2, which supports encryption, the encryption of traffic. And if it's not encrypted, it's not going to go through. So we select OK. So in security options, we can secure communication to domain controllers, meaning user login traffic, and we can secure communication between domain controllers, meaning replication traffic. And this concludes part 1.